Hi, everyone. We are on chapter 27 for America's Story 2, and this chapter is entitled Looking Toward a New Century. As the 19th century came to an end, more and more people were demanding changes in American society. Some demanded a change in the legal rights that women had, while others called for the corrupting evils of our culture to be banned. Women's Suffrage March. New Zealand was the first country to allow women to vote. That did not happen there until 1893. Other countries, including the United States, did not grant women the right until the 1900s. In the meantime, many women actively campaigned for a change to the law. Around the year 1900, there was a marked change in attitudes in America. There were those who pushed for reform in our American society. They wanted equal rights for all Americans and a safer and cleaner country. This time period is called the Progressive Era. In 1870, the 15th Amendment to our Constitution had been passed. This amendment said that all men, black or white, had a right to vote. The key word in this amendment is men. Women did not have the right to vote. They did not have many of the rights that men held. Over the prior 10 years, many other countries had begun to give equal citizenship rights to women. In America, women were joining organizations to fight for the right to vote. In our next book, Volume 3, you'll learn more about this movement and how it has affected our culture in good and bad ways. Some of these women were leaders in the women's rights movement, came together to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Julia Ward Stowe would become famous for their work to bring equal rights to American women. These women all worked to bring attention to the unfair and un-American laws that needed to be changed. Slowly, more and more people came on board. Even though it would not be finished for almost 20 years, the women's rights movement was heading in the right direction. It was also during this time that alcohol came under attack. Many people blamed alcohol consumption for the high crime levels, with good reason. They declared that it was alcohol that caused laziness and irresponsibility. Also true. There were organizations that held protests and demanded action. Many of the women's rights advocates also loudly supported the cause of prohibition, making alcohol illegal. It would be 20 years before it would actually become a law, but the prohibition movement had been started. Of course, as we all know, evil is found in the heart of man, and prohibiting the consumption of alcohol isn't going to change that, sadly. Laziness and irresponsibility is a choice and shouldn't be blamed on anyone or anything except the one who makes the decision to be that way. And that is very true. A person is to take accountability for their own actions, but we also need to make sure we're taking accountability for our own actions, that we're not enabling somebody else to do those things. We are going to take some time to look at the lives of the American presidents who led the country during this time. Grover Cleveland was our 22nd and 24th president, and the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Consecutive means following one after the other in an unbroken series. This means that President Cleveland was elected in 1885 and served a 4-year term as president. And then another president, Benjamin Harrison, was elected and served a term. After President Harris served his 4-year term, Grover Cleveland was elected again in 1893. Grover Cleveland was a popular president. He did much in his 2 terms to bring change to the country. On the subject of political corruption, he took a firm opposing stand. President Cleveland was known for his honesty, even though some of his fellow Democrats were not fond of his policies. He was admired for his insistence on working to bring reform to our country's government. Do you remember learning about President William H. Harrison? He was our 9th president, who was known for dying in office shortly after becoming president. He became known as the president with the shortest term. President Benjamin Harris, our 23rd president, was William H. Harrison's grandson. President Benjamin Harrison is known for his family tree. His ancestry dated back to Jamestown in 1630. His father was a congressman from Ohio, and his great-grandfather was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. As a younger man, Benjamin Harrison fought in the Civil War, was a lawyer, and later became a senator from the state of Indiana. He was an influential and outspoken supporter of the Republican Party. Although Benjamin Harrison is not known for accomplishing any outstanding achievements during his presidency, he is credited with trying to pass laws to help Black Americans gain equal rights. Those laws were defeated in Congress, and civil rights would not be addressed again for quite some time. Our 25th president, William McKinley, could also boast of a long-standing American family. His family came over in the 1740s. William was the last Civil War veteran to be elected to the office of president. Before he became president in 1897, Mr. McKinley had a busy political career. He served in the House of Representatives, followed by a term as governor for the state of Ohio. It was during President McKinley's presidency that the United States went to war, very briefly, with Spain. The Spanish-American War lasted only 3 months, with Spain losing. The United States supported independence for Cuba from Spain and was concerned about how the turmoil in this fight for Cuban independence would affect American interests. In addition, the unexplained explosion of an American ship, the USS Maine, in a Cuban harbor caused further problems between the United States and Spain. As the situation in Cuba deteriorated and Spain proved unable or unwilling to stabilize the situation, the United States declared war. With the United States' victory in the short war, Spain lost control of its territories. President McKinley authorized the purchase of the Spanish colonies of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Despite the fact that not all of these decisions were met with approval, President McKinley was reelected in 1900. Sadly, 1 year later, on September 6, 1901, President McKinley was shot and 8 days later died. Reportedly, the last words he spoke were, "It is God's way. His will be done, not ours." His murderer was found guilty and punished. The nation mourned the loss of their president. President McKinley left behind a wife and daughter. He had been a good man and a strong leader. His vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, took over the presidency. The Spanish-American War. The most famous fighting in the war took place in Cuba. After American troops landed on the coast, they engaged in battles with Cuban soldiers at Kettle Hill, also called San Juan Heights, and San Juan Hill. After winning these battles, the Americans started a siege against the city of Santiago, which quickly surrendered. This victory, combined with the other American military action against Spanish holdings in Puerto Rico and the Philippines, convinced the Spanish to concede defeat only a few weeks after the war had started. United States territories, 1900. After the war, Cuba was granted its independence from Spain, though the United States retained the right to lease a naval base there. Spain also transferred the control of several of its other territories, namely Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, to the United States. As this map shows, these lands were in addition to other Pacific islands and areas of the United States that had already acquired in the late 1800s, including Alaska in 1867. Woohoo! The Spanish-American War. The Cubans staged several revolts against the Spanish in the 1800s. The revolt that eventually led to the Spanish-American War was started by José Martí. The USS Maine sunk in the Cuban harbor of Havana under suspicious circumstances in 1898. To this day, nobody is sure if the Spanish actually caused the explosion or if it was an accident. The incident strained U.S.-Spanish relations and was a leading cause for the outbreak of war. Future President Theodore Roosevelt recruited a volunteer cavalry unit called the Rough Riders and led them to great fame during the war. Famous General Nelson Miles, an experienced veteran of the Civil War and Indian Wars, was responsible for taking Puerto Rico from the Spanish. Roosevelt and his Rough Riders are most famous for fighting on Kettle Hill in the summer of 1898. The U.S. scored an early victory when Admiral George Dewey destroyed the Spanish naval fleet across the world in the Battle of Manila Bay. African-American troops, called Buffalo Soldiers, were instrumental to winning the decisive Battle of San Juan Hill. The Spanish surrendered shortly after. Here are some questions for you to think about. What happens when laws try to control behaviors that only individuals are meant to control? Can laws replace the conscience of mankind? What exactly should the role of government be? How has the imbalance of governmental control affected our country's control? Very interesting questions to think about. Don't forget to do your work to do the pages in your workbook. And we only have one more chapter left after this.